series, helping our audience understand how this pandemic is impacting careers and workplaces in global development. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Maxine Somerville, who is the VP of HR for Engenderhealth, which is a global women's health organization that works on reproductive and sexual health issues around the world. So Maxine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you, Kate.
Great. So you are a global health organization with people and programs all around the world. How has this impacted your work, your programs, and your people to date?
Good. Thank you for that question. Prior to the declaration of a pandemic by the World Health Organization, we had already begun to put into place measures that would allow us to continue to support our mission. We met with each country office to first understand what obstacles they might face, moving into a more remote environment. And most of our country offices were able to identify the roles that were capable of 100% remote work. And others where we might have needed to make some adjustments, we were able to do that to allow employees to continue to be engaged. I think we stretched and we defined a new way of working. We also use this as an opportunity to look at ways to be creative and innovative about how we were providing services at the country level. It was critical that we continue to protect and advance sexual and reproductive health and rights during COVID, because a lot of times these crises exacerbate the existing gender inequalities that we see in the work we do around the world.
Yeah, certainly. So I imagine your teams on the ground are having to quickly kind of pivot and change the way they're operating to adjust to these new realities.
So yes, in fact, we have been able to do that, and we've been able to be quite successful. We've sort of put that work into three different buckets: how we support the public health systems, how we're supporting communities, and how we're supporting individuals. In terms of how we've been supporting public health systems, we've been developing and sharing guidelines and materials with policymakers and health and social workers that prioritize services and care for survivors of gender-based violence. We've been encouraging governments to support SHR self-care interventions such as self-injectable contraceptives. But we've also been supporting national authorities in addressing supply chain issues. And in terms of communities, we've been supporting health workers' ability to provide clients with the information and services that they also need. And for individuals, we've been disseminating information in local languages on self-care options, as well as guidance and resources for mental health care.
So, and it's a lot. I mean, you're thinking about your teams are giving so much of themselves to support the people on the ground and that your programs are supporting. But you probably, as particularly your role of head of HR, thinking about how you support those people. And I'm sure this can put a lot of toll on your team members. So, I mean, employee engagement has been increasingly a priority for organizations and for leaders and HR leaders. And it's not easy to do under normal circumstances, but you throw a global pandemic on top of it, it can make it even more challenging. So what has employee engagement looked like for you all in a remote environment where it's probably also taking a heavy toll on your team members that are, in some cases, on the front lines of responding?
Good question. As an HR professional, it's important to motivate, align, and engage your employees, even more important when you find yourself in a remote work setting like we've all found ourselves in. But I find that the biggest problem that needs addressing is the sense of isolation that one might have from the larger group. And our efforts have been directed towards bringing our staff together and nurturing employee engagement. And one way we do that is to make sure that the teams have the tools that they need to be able to communicate effectively with one another. When you give your remote employees the tools they need to communicate with their peers and managers easily, you can make those connections and keep that engagement. Most of our country offices already had WhatsApp groups that allowed them to stay connected prior to the beginning of the pandemic, and they continue to use that platform and others to stay engaged with one another. Here in the US, with the help of our culture committee, we've created a similar chat using Teams, as I think a lot of organizations have done. And we've used that as a central location for staff to share highlights of their day, pictures of the week, what they did over the weekend, priorities of the week. And so we have a lot of communication platforms that can offer that collaboration and provide opportunities for conversations, even though we're not in the same room.
Yeah, and you mentioned isolation being one of the big challenges. And I think different team members are probably in different situations. You may have some home who are trying to care for young children or play a homeschool teacher while working, some who may be truly living alone and feeling particularly isolated. Others maybe be in a house with many other housemates that it's hard to find a quiet spot. So how do you kind of balance that when you're thinking about supporting and engaging your staff, the recognition that people may be in very different circumstances?
You have to ask. You can't assume what people need until you ask, especially when you work in a remote environment. We offered employees flexibility in terms of their work hours. We have one employee who has a very young child, and she chose to work after hours. So she is present for her child during the day, but she chooses to work in the evening. And so we try to create some flexibility in terms of how people work and where they work to give them the space to make the decisions that are best for them and their families.
That's great. That's probably more than a lot of employers are doing. So that's nice to hear. So you and I are both based in the DC area, and this past week I think has been a particularly challenging moment for our country, for our city, and obviously for people of color and anyone who's seeking social justice, which is pretty much most people who pursue a career in national development. That's very core to who they are. So I know this has been really hard on many people, and it can feel kind of like a moment of a lot of hopelessness, and already a moment that had a lot of hopelessness in it. So, under normal circumstances, you could see team members getting together and being able to grieve and talk about it in person. But how, first of all, how are you doing? And how has this particularly, I think, tough week been for your teams, and how are you approaching that as you think about supporting them?
Good question. It's been a particularly trying time, as you noted, in the US. One that would have been difficult without COVID. And so when you add that on top of the fact that we were already working remotely, it does create more challenge. It's easier to get the pulse of the employees when you're obviously in the office with them and you can see them and you can react to body language and you can take time to check in or stop by or grab coffee and just go have a conversation. When you're working remotely, as you know, that's very much difficult to do. And so it's really hard to read staff over Zoom when you're having meetings and conversations. We've acknowledged that this is an especially trying time for the staff, and we've encouraged them to take the time and the space they need to care for themselves and their community. Our mission is rooted in a vision of equality, and I think that's just as important how we're demonstrating our commitment as an organization to equality. We are publicly and privately committed to equality, diversity, inclusion, and we are trying to live those values every day. And we're learning and we're communicating with staff and constantly evaluating ourselves to determine how we can improve that.
Yeah, I certainly understand. So what have you found works well when engaging your teams in a remote environment, and what has still been challenging?
So I find that we do a better job of communicating and staying in touch because we are engaged in our technology. We pass one another while we're walking between meetings or in hallways, and you're not doing that in a remote environment. And the fact that you can see and you're in close proximity to people, you can strike up a conversation about a topic that might lead to a longer discussion, or oftentimes they'll say, I have a quick question, and they can just pop in and ask that question. So I think we've been very intentional with how we're communicating now with one another. And in terms of in other engagement, I think this has really forced us to think outside of the box in terms of how we engage with our by Mambo the donkey, a real live miniature donkey joined one of our staff meetings. And it was it was a really refreshing addition to the standard staff meeting agenda. We got a lot of smiles, a lot of Mambo. and how he was doing down on the farm in North Carolina. And we sometimes will ask staff to come to meetings with the work appropriate knock jokes, just to keep staff engaged. So they're not always great jokes, but it does keep the staff engaged.
That's fun. I love that idea.
Yeah, and in terms of what we find challenging, I think when you work in a remote work environment, although it's not impossible, collaboration and creativity are probably not as great when you work in a remote environment. You might have that one idea or that one question that might not be so quick now because you're engaging one another over technology. You just can't walk into the person's office and say, hey, what about this idea? Or, you might be in the moment and you think about something, so you just don't have those opportunities. As I said, it might be more challenging, but it's not impossible.
Yeah. And, you also have your headquarters staff, and then you have staff that are working in programs around the world. So how does that differ? Headquarters staff, you're all used to seeing each other on a day-to-day basis, but how are you also integrating your program staff into some of these engagement activities, or maybe treating them differently and letting them get together wherever they're based? How do you approach that?
So they're doing a lot of the same things. So they're getting together. They're still having their staff meetings. Managers are still having the one-on-one conversations with their employees. Our global HR team has created a culture of calling or checking in for no specific work reason. What we miss about being in an office environment, as I said earlier, are those unplanned moments, meeting at the coffee station and exchanging what you did over the weekend, or in human resources about how we're creating those water cooler moments. I have one HR colleague who calls 5 employees every day of every week, actually by telephone, to check in with the employees to see how they're doing and how we can support them. I think it's really important too that we're keeping people updated. We're being consistent and transparent across the organization and how we're communicating with one another. Our president and CEO sends a weekly message to the staff, just checking in, letting them know that we're here and that we're here, we're available, that we're concerned about their well-being and their safety, but also giving some updates about where we are with our COVID response.
Yeah, and there are some, I think in many of these conversations, there are some benefits and some things that we learn can actually work well or better in a remote environment. So are you seeing some of those benefits? Are there some things from this experience that you hope you bring back into your organization, even when we, hopefully all get back to a normal where we can all be able to be in offices together?
Yeah, I think what most organizations are looking for post-COVID is a new normal. And what I'm hoping for Engenderhealth is a better than normal. I'm hoping that we'll pull together the best of everything that we've learned on the other side of COVID to maximize efficiency and productivity as an organization. And I'm hoping that we create opportunities to meet our mission in creative and innovative ways that didn't exist in our programs prior to COVID, pushing the status quo on really how we provide services and perhaps even being able to reach more women and girls.
Yeah, and do you foresee having more? You mentioned having flexible arrangements for one of your staff members who's caring for a young child and adjusting hours. Do you see those things carrying forward and as a way to just be able to provide more flexibility to your team members?
Well, we hope to be able to carry forward some of the lessons that we've learned as a result of COVID, and we're hoping to be able to include some of those things going forward. So absolutely things to consider.
So any advice for other organizations that are maybe struggling or thinking about employee engagement at this moment, on ways that they can think about it, or any other tips or ideas on what you think has worked for you in addition to bringing farm animals into your Zoom calls?
As I said, I think being transparent about your communications with your staff, having, encouraging regular check-ins, those virtual coffee and tea breaks, encourage feedback every step of the way. I think the bottom line for us is we're all in this together, and a little human interaction can go a long way to help us get through this. purposefully leave space at the end or the beginning of meetings just to have people check in and have an opportunity to chat. You know, continue those things that you would have done in the office. If you can do them virtually, continue to do those. And lastly, prioritize your staff well-being, health and safety. We don't make widgets. And so when we say our employees are our greatest asset, we truly mean that. And we've encouraged our staff to take the time off through the pandemic, if only just to re-energize and recharge, given that they really couldn't go anywhere during this time.
Yeah, vacation takes a whole new meaning when it's the ultimate staycation, I guess, is what it is now.
Have the opportunity to disconnect for a little bit, because being in a remote environment, you have a tendency to always be on, or the expectations that you offer yourself for self-care.
Yeah, certainly. So what are you most looking forward to doing once you can get back out there into the world?
I think what I'm most looking forward to is coming back to the office with my colleagues and re-engaging with them, and understanding from an HR perspective how we can continue to support them after COVID-19.
Yes, well, I agree. Well, thank you, Maxine, so much for sharing some of your insights with us today. I appreciate you taking the time. I know it's busy for you guys over there at Engenderhealth with so much going on. So appreciate you sharing your insights with us. For those of you in the audience, please check out more in our Careers During COVID series if you want to learn more about how this has been impacting workplaces and careers across the development sector. If you are looking for a job or a career change, I also encourage you to consider a Devex career account, which gives you access to jobs and career advice and online events all around helping you advance in your global development career. But in the meantime, thank you again, Maxine, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. I hope everyone stays safe and healthy.
Thanks, Kate.